No signs of de-escalation. The U.S. strikes further inside Iran. And Tehran has responded by targeting Washington's military assets in the region. So, what will it take to get them back to the negotiating table? And is a lasting peace deal possible? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. The U.S. and Iran are fighting again, weeks after signing an agreement aimed at reaching a final deal to end the war. At the center of the latest dispute, the Strait of Hormuz. Washington resumed strikes after Tehran fired on ships passing through the waterway. U.S. attacks have focused on the southern coast, but some other parts of Iran have also been hit. President Donald Trump has notified Congress that hostilities have resumed. He says the only way to negotiate with Iran is with military strength. But Tehran says it will not bow to Washington's threats or aggression. So, as the conflict drags on and fears of an all-out war grow, what will it take to get both sides to sit down and talk? And can a lasting deal be reached? We'll discuss this with our guests, but first, this report from Joel Evans.
A sixth consecutive night of U.S. strikes on Iran. CENTCOM says the goal is to degrade Iran's military capabilities and stop it from attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz. But Tehran says the attacks hit bridges and other civilian sites. The renewed fighting comes less than a month after both sides signed an interim agreement to end the conflict.
We are an LNG vessel loaded with LNG dangerous cargo.
The latest escalation began on July 7th, when Iran targeted at least 3 commercial ships near the strait, including a Qatari-flagged LNG tanker.
Status, engine room fire, and full of smoke.
Iranian state media reported that at least one of the vessels was trying to transit a route that was not approved by Tehran. The narrow waterway is critical for global energy flows, and the fight for control over it has been a source of disagreement. The strikes came as the NATO summit was underway in Ankara and prompted this response from US President Donald Trump.
I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them. As far as I'm concerned, it's over.
US strikes on Iran swiftly followed, targeting sites in the south, including Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, and Sirik. Iran retaliated, striking US military assets across the region. Its top negotiator, Mohammad Ghalibaf, said of the attacks on social media, "The era of one-sided deals is over. We told you, keep your word or pay the price. Reality is knocking." Their 14-point agreement included sanctions relief for Iran, the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, and lifting the US blockade on Iranian ports. But for now, President Trump has reimposed the naval blockade. And both sides are locked in escalating attacks, which seem to be pushing them further away from the negotiating table. Joel Evans, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our panel of guests. Joining us from Arlington, Virginia is Kenneth Katzman, Senior Fellow at the Soufan Center. In Washington, D.C., Alan Ayer, Distinguished Diplomatic Fellow with the Middle East Institute. He is also a former member of the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal team. And here in Doha, Mehran Kamrava, Professor of Government at Georgetown University in Qatar and head of the Iranian Studies Unit at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Kenneth, let me start with you today. From your vantage point, has the memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Iran completely collapsed, or is it salvageable at this point?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It has basically collapsed. Your correspondent said that Iran responded by hitting U.S. bases in the Gulf. They launched at U.S. bases. They did not hit any U.S. bases. So I think we have to be clear on the balance of capabilities here. Iran is getting badly hammered, and their responses are increasingly weak. In my view, that gives possible space for more diplomacy. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps felt that the memorandum of understanding was insufficient. It did not give them control over the Strait of Hormuz, even though Mr. Trump made substantial compromises in that accord. but the IRGC wants to punish the United States and get revenge for the killing of Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. So it's pressed its advantage, and now it's being badly, badly hammered. Its responses are very weak. So it's now, in my view, the responsibility of the elected leaders, Mr. Kalibaf, Mr. Pezeshkian, Arakchi, the appointed foreign minister, more moderate elements who are in touch with the population that don't want the war to continue, to instruct or gain the upper hand politically on the IRGC and the hardliners who believe in continuing the war indefinitely, much as Khomeini did against Iraq after he pushed Iraqi forces out of the South in 1982, he decided to go into Iraq to finish off Saddam Hussein, and that did not end well for Iran. And this play by the IRGC is not going to end well for them either.
Now, Ron, where does Iran stand now when it comes to the Memorandum of Understanding? Does the government there think that it has completely collapsed, or are there any signs emerging that there could be some steps taken to more diplomacy?
First, I need to correct what Kenneth just said. Sitting there in Arlington, he might have a different view of reality on the ground here in the Persian Gulf region. I would hardly say that Iran has not necessarily inflicted long-term damage to the peace and stability and the veneer of security that these countries have furnished. So reality on the ground here in Doha is quite different. The cost of business has significantly increased. And people like me, I moved my family here nearly 20 years ago because of the seeming stability, and that has completely been shattered. And so I think I wouldn't dismiss the damage that Donald Trump's war on Iran has done to the Persian Gulf states, the way that the dominant narrative in the United States is. Insofar as the MOU is concerned, I think the Iranians from the very beginning viewed the MOU as an American ruse to buy time, to move more assets into the region, to replenish their stocks, and to launch the concerted attack on Iran. That's one factor. The other factor is that the Iranians, from the very beginning, said that if you look at American behavior, repeatedly the Americans have abrogated the treaties that they have signed, starting with the JCPOA back in 2015, from which the U.S. unilaterally withdrew, and the understanding that the Americans signed on to, both legally during the MOU, and the understanding that they struck with Iran not to attack Iran during Khamenei's funeral, both of them from Tehran's perspective,
let me just
the
give
Americans abrogated.
Let me just give Alan a chance to get into this discussion at this point. I'll come back to you with regards to the JCPOA shortly. Alan, President Trump says that the only way to negotiate with Tehran is with military action. He's sent Congress a letter informing them that hostilities have resumed, but he's also said that Iran wants to make a deal. What do you think the end goal is for the U.S. right now? Do they want to escalate the conflict, or would they actually like to try to make a deal?
Well, I think that President Trump primarily wants to extricate himself from this morass. Obviously, it's clear in retrospect this was a strategic blunder on the part of the United States. And so now he's trying to get out of it as quickly as he can with as little political damage as he can. Were this a commercial venture, he'd just declare bankruptcy. He can't do that because Iran controls the Strait, and their red line is ongoing control of the Strait for a variety of reasons we can talk about if you wish. So he's got to get the Strait back open. That's his goal. But just as you said right now, Mohammed, when he says military strikes are his version of diplomacy, this U.S. administration doesn't know how to do diplomacy. They don't like it. They're not good at it. They like coercion. So he's gone back to the the method he knows best and that the U.S. is best at, which is kinetic strikes on Iran. It might work. I think it's unlikely, but the more we go down this rabbit hole of exchanges of kinetic strikes, the less likely any diplomacy is likely to achieve any modicum of regional stability.
Alan, you said that this administration doesn't really know how to do diplomacy. I want to follow up with you on that because, as we mentioned before, you were a member of the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal team. You were very much involved in those negotiations, and those were protracted negotiations that went on for years. What needs to happen for the U.S. to engage in a way that, from your perspective, would be more productive diplomatically going forward?
Well, that's a great question, Mohammed. But as I said, it may be too late now. You know, some messes are unsolvable. You know, the way diplomacy works, and it's not the case that diplomacy and military aggression are mutually exclusive. I think at one point the U.S. had created a viable space for diplomacy, but we outsourced our diplomacy. We outsourced it to the Qataris, the Pakistanis. There are pluses and minuses for that, especially since, as I said, the U.S. administration is not relying on experienced and capable negotiators. Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, Vice President Vance, all have many skills. None of them are international negotiations on the nuclear issue, for example. So when you add that to the fact that the U.S., at least this administration, is used to exerting pressure, whether it's tariffs or military strikes, and then accepting capitulation, then it seems very unlikely that this administration can do an about-face, field a team of competent, experienced negotiators that the administration trusts politically and reach a diplomatic solution with Iran.
Kenneth, it looked to me like you were reacting to some of what Alan was saying there, so I'm going to give you a chance to jump in, but I also want to ask you a version of the same question. Is there any viable path back to diplomacy right now?
Well, I mean, we can argue about the JCPOA, and I agree that there was no reason to cancel the JCPOA. That was a blunder. We can argue that this initiative begun by Mr. Trump in February was a blunder. I think you know that clearly. I think if Mr. Trump could take it back, he probably would. He was under the impression, just coming off the Venezuela operation, that this would be some easy operation, and maybe Netanyahu persuaded him that with a decapitation strike, they can quickly take out the Islamic Republic. I think Mr. Trump would probably take this all back if he could. But the fact is, we can't rewind the clock. We cannot rewind. We cannot go back to the JCPOA. We cannot go back to February 27th. We are where we are right now. And I completely agree that the team of real estate developers that are on the field now are not the right people to negotiate. But the issue is, we are where we are, and to gain an acceptable solution, diplomatic solution, Mr. Trump is going to have to escalate. He is escalating. He's expanding the target set. He is getting the regime rattled. He's isolating the South. The South is in big trouble on the Iranian coast right now. Doesn't even have to put boots on the ground. He might do that. The issue is, how do we get a diplomatic solution that is close to the MOU that Mr. Trump signed in June, thinking he had the Strait of Hormuz open, and then the IRGC decided, no, that's not good enough. We control the strait. We have to control the strait, and the IRGC upended the entire agreement.
Kenneth, let me also follow up with you and ask, I mean, how close do you think things are when it comes to this escalation ladder that both countries are on right now? How close do you think things are to Donald Trump actually ordering ground troops into different parts of Iran? How realistic a scenario is that at this stage?
Well, as I've said on this show and other show, he really does not want to. He really is trying every method possible to avoid that. And I think that's perfectly understandable. He's trying to use air power now, as I said, to cut off supply lines, cut off routes, cut the South off. He's going to try everything possible to avoid that. It may come to that. He may come to a decision point on that. I don't know. It's being considered. I don't know how seriously. Mr. Trump certainly wants to avoid it. but he's not going to just allow Iran to control the strait and claim to control the strait. That's not going to be allowed. And Mr. Trump will do what he needs to do, I think, to prevent that outcome.
Mehran, have talks stopped completely between the U.S. and Iran at this stage? Or is there some sort of back-channel communication going on? Or are there some type of negotiations going on? I mean, where do things stand when it comes to diplomacy at this moment? Is it completely cut off?
At least publicly, they seem to be completely cut off. But we had the Iranian foreign minister here a couple of days ago in Doha. And from here, he went to Oman to have discussions. I think the Pakistanis and the Iranians are talking, and the Pakistanis and the Americans are also talking. So whether or not there are messages being passed back and forth, I don't really know, and I don't think anyone knows at this stage. But I agree that the Iranians and the Americans are sending signals to one another about the costs involved, for both sides, if they don't necessarily negotiate. What the Iranians are trying to do is to put pressure on the regional states here for them to go to the United States and say, stop attacking Iranian targets.
And Mehran, do you think that that strategy will ultimately be successful? Can they gain leverage in that sense by doing that?
You know, that's hard to tell. What the Iranians have tried to do is to turn the conflict from a military one into an economic one, to increase the economic costs of the attacks. They are aware that they cannot go toe-to-toe with the Americans and the Israelis militarily, but they can hurt the United States and its regional allies economically. Will that strategy succeed? We don't know yet.
Alan, I want to ask you about something that comes up more and more these days when it comes to this overall negotiating structure that we've been witnessing the past few months. More and more, when talks are going on or back-channel communications are going on, we're also seeing, whether it be Donald Trump or other officials in the U.S. or officials in Iran, posting incendiary, provocative posts on social media channels. And I want to ask you, as somebody who's been involved in negotiations between Iran and the U.S. in the past, when it comes to two countries where there is so much distrust between them, from your vantage point, what does that do at a time like this, at such a critical time when tensions are so high, when you have efforts to try to de-escalate, but you also have officials posting provocative statements or threats on social media channels? How does that impact things?
Great question, Mohammed. First, I would distinguish between each side's method of strategic messaging. Iran, when it does strategic messaging, has message discipline and is strategically consistent. What an IRGC general says one day, there's information content and there's tone. It's going to be pretty consistent with what he said the previous day, what he'll say the next day. In this way, they're trying to communicate their stance to Iran, to the U.S. and to the world. I think one of the problems we're facing with this diplomacy, especially given the total absence of mutual trust, is that Iran looks at the social media from the U.S. side, President Trump, and sees not just bellicosity, but massive strategic inconsistency, right? So from Iran's point of view, they can't trust what the U.S. administration is saying at any given time. One day, President Trump is calling the IRGC leadership, moderate and rational. The next day, they're scum and crooked. So, or even in the beginning of negotiations before the war, at one point, the U.S. was willing to accept indigenous enrichment on Iranian soil. Then it wasn't. So I'm not too worried about the rhetoric. If there was serious and sustained negotiations going on behind all the rhetoric, that would obviate the toxicity of this rhetoric. But I think on both sides now, given the absence of any mutual commitment to bilateral sustained negotiations, you're just seeing two sides shouting at each other.
Kenneth, let me ask you a version of the same question. I mean, what is this kind of rhetoric, especially in the digital space? I mean, what kind of impact does that have on trying to narrow the gaps between countries that are so distrustful of one another. How does that impact the possibility of further negotiations?
Well, what we've seen, it's a great question, Mohammed. I mean, what we've seen is the rhetoric gets very sharp on both sides, yet they still are able to. The rhetoric was very sharp before the Memorandum of Understanding was signed, yet it was signed. And the IRGC did not overturn the MOU because of messaging. It overturned it because the U.S. was able to convince ships to go through the Omani coast, along the Omani coast, and it saw its leverage over the strait eroding. It wasn't because of Mr. Trump's verbiage, although, obviously his constant shifts from day to day, as we said, from their scum to their logical and their reasonable, it's really quite sharp change by day. But I think Mr. Trump's verbiage reflects his extreme. He feels Iran stabbed him in the back, is what I boil it down to. He felt he had a deal, which he gave away a lot in his view. It was acceptable, not great, but it was acceptable. And he thought he was going to get the strait opened as a consequence of that deal, totally open, no fees, no shooting, no nothing. And the RGC then attacked 3 ships. And in his view, they just stabbed him in the back. Like a real estate counterparty, as if they had stabbed him in the back in a real estate deal. And he is not going to forgive them for this. So it's going to be a rough road, I'm afraid.
Mehran, what does an ideal deal going forward look like for each side? And also, can either side right now afford an all-out war if this continues to escalate?
Neither side can afford an all-out war, and diplomacy, Mohammed, is the art of the possible. So it's quite possible for capable diplomats, rather than real estate moguls, to come up with win-win scenarios. And it is not inconceivable for countries like Oman, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, to present win-win scenarios in which Iran retains some sort of administrative influence in the Strait of Hormuz, but it's presented with security guarantees by the United States and its regional allies in return for free passage. I think there are various creative scenarios whereby everybody can walk away turning to their constituents and say, we got something. But unfortunately, as we've just been talking about, in the current charged atmosphere, people keep talking past each other.
And Mehran, from your point of view, I mean, what is, if I could ask you, one potential scenario whereby the parties could walk away and say, hey, we've accomplished what we wanted here. We can de-escalate now. We can tone things down.
Look, Iran wants some sort of administrative influence over the Strait of Hormuz, not necessarily fees or toll of any kind. And it has been working with Oman to create something. So that's what the Iranians want. The Americans and the GCC states do not want any sort of fees or any sort of toll that would enable Iran to impede traffic. And so there are a number of low-hanging fruits right there whereby you could come up with win-win scenarios.
Alan, let me ask you, when you read what the points were when it came to this memorandum of understanding, because a lot of experts, once it emerged what this deal entailed, believed that the language was too vague and that this would lead to misunderstanding and potential further clashes. When you saw what the deal or the agreement, the memo of understanding entailed, did you think that the language was too vague? Did you think that this really had the potential of getting into, fighting once more?
Well, look, the MOU is not a legal document, okay? There's no judge, international judge, with a periwig and a gavel who rules on interpretation. The MOU was an invitation to negotiate. Yes, the sentences as printed were important, and yes, Article 5, which talked about the straits being open, ba tartibat Irani, with Iranian arrangements, or tartibat Iran, with Iran's arrangements, that was significant. But it was up to the two sides after the MOU to fill in the details. That's what negotiation is. So the MOU in and of itself was the start of a process. The problem was the red lines are so far apart. Iran feels it must retain some type of control over the strait for leverage, for strategic deterrence, possibly for monetization because they need money. The U.S. didn't want to allow that, even though paradoxically it really wouldn't add much, prices to gas, to oil in the rest of the world. The GCC countries would disproportionately pay any tolling that Iran does. But anyway, the MOU would have worked if there had been goodwill and intent on either side to pursue negotiations and fill in the details. But that obviously wasn't the case, which is one of the reasons why we're here now.
So, Alan, if both sides want to pursue further negotiations, if they want to de-escalate going forward, what has to happen? Do they need to completely redraft the memorandum of understanding? Do they need to write up another one? How do they get to a point where they create a framework by which they can actually negotiate in better faith going forward?
Well, as I said, the MOU is irrelevant. The text of the MOU is largely irrelevant. It is the invitation to start a process. So what has to happen, Mohammed? There has to be a step change in the ambient conditions for either Iran or the U.S. For example, if the Strait of Hormuz continues to be closed or constricted, global economic conditions, as the global economy loses more and more resiliency, as the diesel crack spread goes higher, will cause President Trump to think twice about continuing these hostilities. Or, as Dr. Katzman referred to earlier, it could be analogous to the Iran-Iraq war, where a bunch of people go up to the IRGC generals and say, you must drink from the poison chalice, because if we continue in this manner due to the blockade, 3 or 4 or 5 months down the road, the Islamic Republic of Iran will collapse. That's what's motivating the IRGC, preserving the regime in the face of what they see as incessant U.S. and Israeli hostility that will continue regardless of what's determined in terms of ending this war.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there today. Thanks so much to all our guests, Kenneth Katzman, Alan Eyre, and Mehran Kamrava. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment. Stay tuned.